Welcome to this lesson on understanding globalization. This is the first of a number of lessons on globalization and international business, and provides an introduction to the evolution and impact of globalization on people and economies worldwide. Another important variable in international business is globalization. Globalization is the close integration of countries and peoples around the world. Traditionally, international business has stressed the economic dimension of globalization. Hill defines it as the shift toward a more integrated and interdependent world economy. And economic globalization can be described as the tendency toward an international integration of goods, technology, information, labor, and capital, or the process of making this integration happen. Since ancient times, humans have sought distant places to settle, produce, and exchange goods, enabled by improvements in technology and transportation. But not until the 19th century did global integration take off. Following centuries of European colonization and trade activity, that first wave of globalization was propelled by steamships, railroads, the telegraph, and other breakthroughs, and also by increasing economic cooperation among countries. Globalization is not new. For thousands of years, people have been buying from and selling to each other in lands at great distances, such as through the famed Silk Road across Central Asia, that connected China and Europe during the Middle Ages. Likewise, for centuries, people and corporations have invested in enterprises in other countries. China's Belt and Road Initiative is the biggest infrastructure project in human history. This overarching program includes overland routes through Central Asia in the Silk Road economic belt, plus a seaborne component called the Maritime Silk Road. The Maritime Road skirts the southern rim of Asia, on the Indian Ocean route to the Middle East and Europe. This initiative is considered to be central to China's ambition of becoming the preeminent world power. Hill defines globalization as the shift toward a more integrated and interdependent world economy. He goes on to define economic liberalization as the tendency toward an international integration of goods, technology, information, labor, and capital, or the process of making this integration happen. This aspect of globalization is related to and sometimes called globalization of markets, the gradual integration and growing interdependence of national economies. Globalization can also be understood in terms of market globalization, or the merging of historically distinct and separate national markets into one huge global marketplace. So why is international trade good for nations? Scholars sought to explain not only why international trade was good for individual nations, but how nations could position themselves for international business success. Harvard professor Michael Porter made a seminal contribution in this respect in The Competitive Advantage of Nations in 1990. Competitive advantage is usually defined as distinctive assets or competences of a firm, typically derived from cost, size or innovation strengths, that are difficult for competitors to replicate or imitate. According to Michael Porter, nations can have a competitive advantage as well, which depends on the collective competitive advantages of the nation's firms. As part of his explanation in The Competitive Advantage of Nations, Michael Porter developed the diamond model. This theory focuses on why certain industries within a nation are competitive internationally. For example, while Japanese automobile industries are globally successful, Japanese service industries are not. Porter argues that the competitive advantage of certain industries in different nations depends on four aspects. These include home factor conditions, homegrown resources and natural endowments. Home demand conditions, the nature of home demand for the industry's products, home firm strategy, structure and rivalry, the conditions governing firm creation, etc. And related and supporting industries, the presence of internationally competitive suppliers, etc. Porter argues that the competitive advantage of certain industries in different nations depends on four aspects. The first factor is home factor conditions, such as homegrown resources and natural endowments. Australia, for example, is richly endowed with mineral resources. The next is home demand conditions, the nature of home demand for the industry's products. The third factor is home firm strategy, structure and rivalry, that is the conditions governing firm creation, etc. And the fourth factor is related and supporting industries, that is the presence of internationally competitive suppliers, etc. It is useful to consider the difference between comparative and competitive advantage. The concept of comparative advantage is more rooted in economics, and refers to a superior feature of a nation or industry. The concept of a competitive advantage, on the other hand, is more rooted in strategic management, and refers to distinctive assets or competencies of a firm. However, sometimes authors argue that nations or industries can have competitive advantages as well. The key distinction is that while comparative advantage seeks to explain patterns and gains from trade, the competitive advantage explains which firms, industries or nations will be winners in a global competition, and how they can position themselves for it. From the sourcing side, economic globalization also entails globalization of production, that is the sourcing of goods and services from locations around the globe, to take advantage of national differences in the cost and quality of various factors of production, such as labor, energy, land and capital. This chart illustrates the evolution of world trade in intermediate versus final goods as a percent of GDP between 1990 and 2014. We can see that increasingly, global supply chains are dominating world trade. Another form of globalization is technological. Technological globalization is a result of the rise of information technology, and the decreasing costs of global communication. Multinational enterprises such as Google, eBay and Facebook have played an important role in this process, although they have a number of strong local or international competitors. Chinese e-commerce company, Alibaba, defeated eBay on its home turf in China, but interestingly later internationalized, by listing on the New York Stock Exchange in September 2014, becoming the largest initial public offering in world history. This shows that globalization is not a trend solely driven by the United States or Western multinationals. Jack Ma, the chairman of Alibaba, was China's richest man in 2018. It is perhaps useful to think of globalization from a historical perspective. The first phase is characterized by trade in the British and other empires, through ocean transport, railroads, trading companies. In the second phase, we saw the rise of the international steel and electricity corporations, and European and US multinationals. In the third phase at the end of World War II, we saw the Marshall Plan, the rise of Japan and other multinational brands. And in the fourth phase, we saw the end of Cold War, and more privatization, and the rise of China and the opening of emerging markets. According to Bremer, we have entered another phase of globalization in the aftermath of the global recession of 2008 and 2009. He calls this phase guarded globalization, suggesting that governments of developing nations have become wary of opening more industries to multinational enterprises, and they are zealously protecting local interests. For example, India's Patent Office revoked Pfizer's patent for the cancer drug Sutent, and granted a domestic manufacturer, Cipla, the right to produce a cheaper generic version. Donald Trump's election in the US and Brexit, Britain's vote to leave the European Union, indicate that we have entered an era of skepticism about globalization in developed countries. While backlash against globalization is not new, its co-opting by populist politicians in the West and elsewhere is taking new forms and poses significant challenges to organizations around the world. Roderick argues that both right-wing and left-wing populism have been on the rise for a while, and are consequences of advanced stages of economic globalization. Muddenby identifies the rising knowledge intensity of world output, and the migration of low-knowledge activities away from high-income countries, as two key trends underlying the rise of populism. In this first presentation, we have considered many of the impacts of globalization. The wide-ranging effects of globalization are complex and politically charged. As with major technological advances, globalization benefits society as a whole, while harming certain groups. We have seen that supply chains are nowadays globalized, and that our dependence on these can create benefits, but also pose threats in times of political and economic crisis. We have seen that globalization has evolved in 4 phases over the past 150 years, and continues to evolve at a pace. In the next presentation, we will look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of globalization. There are a number of activities to complete for this unit. Take the time to complete these in your manual. In this way, you will better learn from and retain the knowledge covered in this unit. Many thanks for watching this lesson. Want to learn more? Click on our website to view our range of courses on marketing and sales management.